recorded. We are going to shut off the recording at the Q&A sessions so that people can remain anonymous. Your confidentiality is very, very important to us. So we will make sure we shut that off. Your face is not visible for this webinar. And if you do want to change your name, simply go to the participants button here on Zoom and find your name. And then when you hover over your name, you'll see a blue box that says more. You just click on more and rename. You can, rename yourself there. You might want to put it on speaker view. So up at the top, there's gallery view and speaker view. A lot of people like speaker view. Then you're just watching the speaker as they speak without any distractions. So anyone who's registered for this webinar, whether they're here or couldn't make it for another reason, within 2 days, you will get a copy of this recording through your email. So you'll be able to either rewatch it, or if someone didn't make it, they'll still be able to see it. And also Diana is allowing us to send a copy of her presentation along with that. So we're really grateful for that. So without further ado, I would love to introduce our guest, who's very special to us. And this is in honor of Recovery Month, because honestly, families are in recovery too. So we all felt like it was a nice idea to have Diana, because she discusses family dynamics and family recovery. You may have seen her if you went to our conference, the Knowledge is Power conference in the summer of 2018. But if not, you're in for a real treat. Or actually, you can watch her presentation more than once. It's always so helpful. So I'll stop yapping and I will read Diana's bio for you, and then I'm going to turn it over. So Diana Clark is from O'Connor Professional Group's Chief of Clinical Operations. She's a renowned family recovery advocate in the field of addiction and mental health treatment. With a master's degree in psychology from Antioch, New England Graduate School in 1997, Diana has been aiding families during times of turmoil for over 20 years. Prior to her work in the mental health field, Diana was a practicing labor and employment attorney, advising employers in the implementation of clear and compassionate policies. As a specialist in both family systems and parenting, Diana is a recognized force of clear speech, logic, and loving acceptance, and has helped thousands of family members establish healthy boundaries, manage expectations appropriately, and develop plans for their families. Diana has developed and facilitated numerous workshops for families and professionals, and is also the author of the book, Addiction Recovery, A Family's Journey, which offers guidance for family members of those struggling with substance use disorders and mental health concerns. So Diana, thank you so much, and I'm very excited that you're here, and thank you for coming here. I'll stop sharing my screen so that you can share yours.
Okay, thank you, Joanne. It's an honor to be here. Let me make this a little bit bigger. There we go. So tonight we're going to be talking about family dynamics and family recovery. And because, as you just said, Joanne, every family who has a loved one who is struggling with a substance use disorder or mental health disorder is either in family recovery or in need of it. So, because let's talk about what's happened to our loved one. What's happened? Our loved one has potentially joined the ranks of the 100 million people. 23.5 million Americans need treatment, almost 10% of the population. For every one addicted loved one, there are approximately 4, there we go. Share screen. Something just clicked. Play from current slide. There we go. Okay, sorry folks. For every addicted loved one, there are approximately 4 affected family members. That's 100 million Americans struggling. And we know that early experimentation increases the odds of a substance use disorder later on. It just does. The age of first experimentation increases odds by exponentially. If somebody starts at age 13 using substances, they have a 47% chance of struggling with a substance use disorder later on because the teen brain is under construction. If kids could, would, should wait until they were 21, that goes down to 9%. So the earlier they start, the more likely they are to have struggle later on. And I think if we can communicate to our families, communicate to our communities, our schools, and shout it loud, let's make it more difficult to use substances until they're old enough to take responsibility for them. We also know that there's a new study about teen marijuana use, and that while cannabis might lighten the mood for a minute, it worsens depression over time. So this was done in Canada by studying Canadians and Americans between the ages of 18 and 30. And what it found was that 25,000 young Canadians and 400,000 young Americans suffer from depression because of early cannabis consumption. So while we may be concerned about our loved ones using opioids and less concerned about it using marijuana, and I agree.
Yeah, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but we're not seeing your presentation, I'm realizing. I'm so sorry.
You're not.
No, I'm sorry.
Okay, let's start from the beginning. Can you see that?
No. So sorry.
That's okay. Can you see it now?
Mm-mm. Wonder why.
Screen sharing has stopped. So, all right, I have an idea. Are you sharing your screen still?
No. No. Try clicking on share screen again at the bottom. And there you go. We can see it now.
Okay, nothing like getting the presenter to sweat a little bit. All
Sorry
right.
about that.
Here I thought, that's never happened to me, Joanne, so I'm so glad that I'm with you guys because that feels better with you all than most places.
We're all in this together, don't worry about it.
Absolutely. Okay, starting back over, revving right back up. We're talking about family recovery, and what we're really talking about is what's happened to our loved ones. And our loved ones may be one of that 100 million people struggling with a substance use disorder, and we may be the one of the 4 who's in need of or in recovery for somebody else's substance use disorder. Because for every one person struggling with the disorder, there are 4 others struggling with their struggle. That's just the numbers. What we also know is that cannabis may lighten the mood initially, but it worsens depression over time. And so while cannabis is becoming more and more legalized, and it may be a better substitute to opioids, I'm not going to argue with that. It is definitely less lethal. It is creating instability and depression in our youth. And I just wanted to make that clear while we were talking. But let's get back to substance use disorders. According to the American Society of Addictive Medicine, are chronic, which means lifelong, neurobiological, which means affecting the cells of the brain, with genetic and environmental features. It's a really nice, tidy package, and I've never met anybody who fits very tidily into this disorder. Because for every person struggling with a substance use disorder, they may be struggling by and large with an anxiety disorder and a depressive disorder and ADHD. There's usually symptoms of other kinds of things going on. But this is what the American Society of Addictive Medicine describes as a substance use disorder. And tonight we're going to just talk inch by inch about what does the neuroscience mean. So the neuroscience means, according to the two very simple concepts I understand, it means when cells fire together, they wire together. And when cells, we don't use certain cells, we use it or lose it. So let's imagine that this is a neuron. It's got those little tiny feathers coming off the ends of it, and you are thinking about how to get a substance. A neuron lights up, and the next time that person thinks about getting that substance again, like thoughts, fire together or wire together, that clicks into another neuron, and we've got the beginning of a neural network. And how this happens isn't, a big surprise. You get a teenager or a young adult who goes to a party and he's feeling kind of awkward, and somebody offers a drink or a joint or a hit or a snort or anything else. And if that person does it and in some way their consciousness is altered, they may feel more comfortable in their own skin. They may feel like they have more charm in their gift of gab. They may feel better looking. And in that moment, their brain said, remember this. And the next time they thought about that moment, they didn't even have to repeat the doing of the substance, but really just remember it. What did it feel like to feel better with the aid of that substance? Another neuron lights up because it's a thought and connects to the last one. Fire together, wire together. Like thoughts develop neural networks. And that's true whether we're thinking about substances or whether we're thinking of mathematical principles. If we're thinking about math all day, we're firing a lot of like thoughts and developing a neural network of mathematical aptitude. So the opposite is also true. Use it or lose it. When somebody stops thinking about using substances, when somebody stops thinking about numbing pain and starts using a different coping strategy, that neural network begins to shrink. And so a substance use disorder and early recovery indicates to me that this is a race. It's a race between this long-term existing neural network of addiction or substance use, numbing, and a new network of coping strategies developing. And what we know is the one that is attended to most, the one that is paid attention to, the one that the person, in fact, who gets up in the morning and reads a meditation or does some deep breathing and maybe meditates, who maybe goes to an AA meeting or maybe goes to a smart recovery meeting, but focuses on a recovery for themselves, however they define it in that moment, is changing their brain. They aren't just not using drugs. So in the triune brain theory, we're talking about a brain with three fundamental parts. The lower part, the brain stem, the cerebellum, the brain stem, both of those are responsible for autonomic functioning, heart rate, breathing. We don't have to tell the lungs to inflate, they just do that. That's autonomic. Similarly, the heart beats, bump, bump, without us saying, okay, you got a beat now, you got a beat now. And then moving up, we get the midbrain. The midbrain is where our place of survival and our notions and narratives of survival reside. And so when somebody becomes hijacked by substances, that substance may become equated with a survival need. And you hear this really in normal lexicon speech. People would come home from work and they would say, not I want a drink, but I need a drink. That need is what we're talking about. In a real sense, that drug, alcohol, substance behavior becomes equal to survival to somebody, so they engage in behavior that they would engage in if it was in fact a different survival need. So I ask workshop attendees, would you lie if you were out of water and you needed water and there was a drought? You might, because it was a survival need. Would you manipulate to get food? Very, very likely. So that's the midbrain. Then moving up, we've got the prefrontal cortex. And the prefrontal cortex is the judgment center of the brain, which is manifested by adult and moral behavior. When it's disrupted, we see impulse problems, lying and stealing and manipulating, and a continual disintegration of adult functioning. So I've used these masks for about 20 years now, and they're getting pretty frayed. But a brain without a functioning prefrontal cortex sounds a little like this. Go ahead, steal the necklace. She never wears the necklace anyway. Or you can drink and drive, drunk driving laws. Those are for amateurs. You're a pro. That's a prefrontal cortex that's been hijacked. A functioning prefrontal cortex would sound more like Mary Poppins. Yoo-hoo, you drink and drive. You might hurt somebody other than yourself. Yoo-hoo, you lie to your mother, your father, your sister, your wife, your husband. They may not trust you later on. Or if you put a needle in your arm, you may not wake up. So it's like the angel and the devil on the shoulder, although in this case we're using good old Mary. And the voice that is the loudest is the one we tend to pay attention to. And when somebody is in the throes of active addiction, that devil voice is pretty loud. I tell the story that a good friend of mine and I were at a wedding, and sitting in front of us was a woman who had golf ball sized pearls on. And I was looking at the pearls and he was looking at me, and he elbowed me and he said, I still want to steal the necklace. And I laughed and we continued through the wedding. And at the end of it, I said, what was that about? And he goes, I was a really good thief. I would have had that necklace off. I would have had it in my pocket. I would have been at the pawn shop and I'd have been getting high in about 30 minutes. And I said, and then how'd you feel? And he said, high. And I said, well, what happens later? He said, well, after I came down, I felt remorse. I did feel remorse. I felt that other part of myself reinsert themselves and say, you just stole, lied, manipulated, and you are a rotten human being. And I said, and what'd you do when you heard that voice? He said, I got high again because I didn't know how to deal with it. So that's the cycle. And when the prefrontal cortex gets hijacked, there's no stop sign to the brain. What we also know is that drugs alter dopamine. That's the feel-good chemical, the one we all want to feel periodically. And serotonin and oxytocin, which moderate, stabilize, and elevate mood. Falling neurochemicals in the brain when they come down from using substances registers as really unpleasant and stimulates craving for that same thing to elevate it again. And through the use of continual drug use, the production of dopamine and other neurochemicals becomes derailed or interfered with, and it brain stops producing in the same way it did prior to substances. Because a brain that's getting a ton of neurochemicals from outside, or brain or substances that are triggering the neurochemicals to constantly fire, 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 the brain is tired after the fire, 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 and the brain says, you're getting that feeling from using cocaine? Then I won't generate it naturally. That's the homeostasis. And so when somebody stops using the cocaine or heroin or marijuana or alcohol, the brain takes a while to recalibrate. So People don't just use drugs by and large just because it's fun. There are those people. There are. I'm not going to say it. There aren't. But what I'm hearing these days, and particularly in COVID, is that people are medicating to eliminate pain. People are scared right now. People are anxious. The rates of anxiety are up 47%. The rates of alcohol delivery are up 450%. Opioid deaths are up. And because we're living in a painful time and there's no way to address a pandemic or racial injustices or economic despair for the whole nation or world, we seek to numb that pain, and drugs and alcohol are an obvious answer. And then the cure becomes the problem. Because when we start using, when we continue use to numb pain, we don't develop other coping strategies. And they think that if somebody starts using at the age of 14, regardless of whether they are 14 or 45, they remain emotionally the same age as when they started if they continue to use substances. Because what do they learn? They learn one coping strategy. Pain can be a really big teacher for us. Pain tells us when to go to the doctor, the dentist. Pain tells us when to change who we are. It is pain that we look to as seeking to escape so that we may need to change. And if substances are the one you rely on, that's the one you use. If you use meditating, breathing, talking to a friend, going for a walk, you have a whole range of coping strategies. People with substance use disorders learn only one. So, and what pain are they medicating? They may be medicating physical pain or a psychiatric disorder or a social discomfort, or pain resulting from a life stressor such as trauma, medicating pain and using substances to change the way they feel. Other reasons, they may be one of those kids who was always looking for risk and excitement. Drugs and alcohol provide a vehicle for bonding. You don't have to be a superstar athlete or the valedictorian of this class to find people to bond with if you're willing to use substances. And they do provide physical pleasure. This quote I have used for many years because I love how concise it is and what it says. Drunk, you find yourself smarter and funnier and stronger and braver and even better looking. For a budding alcoholic, booze seems to do more for you than it does the others, and your only regret is that you didn't come across this miracle potion sooner. And if you substitute the word alcohol for the substance of choice, that is what goes on in the brain of somebody who finds themselves medicating with a substance. So we've got this malfunctioning brain, the stop sign of the brain, the prefrontal cortex has been hijacked. The midbrain has become hijacked, and the brain thinks it needs these substances for survival, so to speak. So then we have payoffs for use, drug culture. We live in a culture that is constantly trying to medicate. You can't watch TV without seeing ads for substances, whether they're legal, right? They could be drugs to deal with restless leg. They could be drugs to navigate pain. They could be drugs for all kinds of things. But we live in a culture that thinks about immediate resolution of pain. People's personality changes. There's often a loss of non-using peers. There's addictive denial. That's what adds up to the substance use disorder. And if we're lucky, they go to treatment. But if they are of the 90% of people who have substance use disorders do not get help. And they do this in their home. And they do it where they have to learn how to live sober, change all associated habits, change their thinking, change their friends, change their goals, function in the world, cope with stress, struggle, and pain, change just about every single thing. They have to change. And that is not an easy one. So what helps that change? Number one, time. The brain takes a long time to develop these neural networks, and it takes repeated thought and repeated action and repeat and rinse and repeat and rinse. They think it takes about 4 months to begin just the seedling of a new neural network. And it really is 24 months before we see a flourishing one. And during that time, the professional wisdom would say, be abstinent, because when you're not abstinent, the brain doesn't tend to do the thinking it needs to do to change. The neurochemistry doesn't change. And the third thing is a program of recovery, however that is defined, that provides structure, ideally a sense of community, ideally a sense of the ability to change our thinking and focus on making steps towards becoming a person who lives life with purpose, passion, humility, and meaning. So what is a recovery program? Saving, rebuilding the life that's saved. Find a spiritual foundation for struggle, potentially. Find mentoring, find brain retraining, using healthier coping strategies like exercise, and petting animals actually changes our neurochemistry. So there's a whole bunch we're talking about when we're talking about a recovery program. So that's them. Now I want to move on to us. What's happened to us? They've changed, they've got numb. We have changed too, because while they're getting numb, high, or emotionally dysregulated, we get worried. And that can be called continuous trauma. That can be continuous trauma, to not know whether your opioid addicted child is going to wake up the next day. It can be considered trauma to know that your alcoholic son has stolen your car and is out drinking, and you don't know if he's going to make it home alive. And so we try to cope. And in an effort to cope, we try to control sometimes snippets of behavior. We try to control the uncontrollable instead of looking at the disorder as a disease. And the other thing we often do is we ignore the obvious. When my goddaughter, Katie, was active in her methamphetamine addiction, her mother walked by little envelopes, those glassine envelopes, and tubing and probably needles, with the ability to just walk by, not because she didn't love her daughter, but because she just couldn't see it. She just couldn't see it. So what also is happening to us is we adjust. Humans are amazing at the ability to adjust. We adjust our definitions. We adjust all kinds of ways. And the best way I know how to describe this is an old story I tell about the 90s. And that was when Newsweek came out with an article that said, if you are a woman and you are single and you are looking for a man and you are over 30, your odds of finding such man were less than getting killed by a terrorist. And I remember this vividly because I was such a woman. I was a woman. I was over 30. I was single. I was looking to not be single. And I was visiting my brother, and he was having a heyday with this news and this, this concept that was all over the United States at one point. And he just said, guess you better start looking for a pet, because a man is not in your future. And after we had a discussion about that, and I sopped up my tears, we sat down to watch Saturday Night Live. And Saturday Night Live, of course, had to do a riff on this, a comedic riff. And they did a dating game. And the dating game was a beautiful woman picking from these 3 losers, Saturday Night Live guys, picking their noses and scratching their bottoms. And the name of the game was, you've got to lower your standards. And that's what happens with us. We adjust, we lower our standards. And every time we lower our standards and make the unacceptable acceptable, we're engaging in denial, because we are no longer looking at the thing that once was not acceptable. A friend of mine tells the story that her parents were very relieved when her heroin addictive brother relapsed on intravenous cocaine. And she said to the family, how was it that somehow cocaine became acceptable as a recovery substitute? They had lowered their expectations. So denial, not, please, please, please don't hear me wrong. This is not a character flaw. This is a mechanism we use when the truth is too painful to look at. And so our psyches need to make continual adaptations to our standards so that dysfunctional behavior can seem normal. Ultimately, it doesn't last forever, and it's in our best interest to move through it as quickly as possible. Excuse me. Because as our expectations reduce, guess what? We start doing more too. It isn't happen in a vacuum. We don't just start saying, oh, it's okay that he doesn't set his alarm clock. We say, it's okay he doesn't set his alarm clock. I'll be the alarm clock. And we do it on a Monday because we knew they had a hard weekend. And then we thought, well, maybe we'll do it on Tuesday. And the next time we do it, guess what? We have created a new expectation. And the more we do, the less they do, until the less becomes the new norm. And we all fall down. So in this time of what some would call togetherness in our homes, working together, taking care of each other, we have got to be really, really cautious that we are not doing way, way more than is humanly possible or more than our share, because we will fall down. And how I learned this lesson was my son, this is him in the 3rd grade, and I got a call into the teacher and she said, your son's a mess. And I was like, really? I knew this. And I was really concerned about it. I laugh about it now because he's 19 and this was a long time ago. But she called me and she said, he is a mess, and he is a mess because of what you are doing. And I was like, ouch. And she, with a full finger wag, said, you are doing too much for him. I know you load his backpack. I know you go through his folder for him. I know you're doing homework with him. I know you are cleaning up after him. I know he doesn't have chores, and it shows. And I was like, okay. So tell me what to do. I was listening, again, probably with my eyes welling with tears. And she said, do less. Just do less. Let him be uncomfortable. And I said, oh God, not that lesson. I know that lesson. I teach that lesson. So the next day came and it was gym day, and I put his sneakers next to his backpack and we drive off to the little school in rural Vermont. And he says from the back seat, as we pull up to the oval in front of the little schoolhouse, he said, I forgot my sneakers and it's gym day. You need to go get them. And I was like, oh, here we go. I said, no, I'm not going to get your sneakers today. I left them by your backpack. You failed to bring them. You can make it through the day. Take off your boots, because he was wearing big moon boots, and do school in your socks. They won't let you do that anymore. I don't know when you think this is. I said, oh. He said, Mom, I am a klutz. I am uncoordinated. And I have gym, and we're playing volleyball, and I have moon boots on. And I'm going to be bullied, and it's going to be your fault. And my stomach just lurched, and it took every ounce of strength I had to say, go on, you can make it through the day. The teacher sort of pulled him out the door. He went into the classroom, but I spent the day worrying about him. about whether he was bullied, about whether he could jump more than a half an inch with moon boots on in a volleyball tournament. I was a mess, and I waited for the bad mommy police to call. And at the end of the day, he comes home, stomps up the deck stairs, and I raced to greet him at the door. And I was like, "How was your day?" And he said, "Fine. Why? What's to eat?" And I thought, wow, I learned something really valuable that day. Not only does he really, really know how to pull my strings and hit my panel of buttons because I had had a horrible day, but that left to their own devices, generally speaking, kids figure it out. A few months go by, and the reason I tell this story is because it was class picture day, and his teacher put him in the front row because he is taller than anybody else in that class. So, for just as they have been changing, we have changed too. Our old methods of coping and interacting aren't working. We feel like we've landed on a strange planet. That's the reason we need recovery. The persistent stress and trauma of witnessing this loved one, again, has a negative impact on our sympathetic nervous system, and that overactivates our fight or flight response and can make us cause us to make irrational decisions rather than wise and sensible ones. So know in your heads when you're calm that when you're not calm, you may not be making the best decisions. Try to plan what you're going to do before the non-calm comes, because it will come. And grandparents, you have compounding stress because you're dealing with 2 generations of concern. You're worried about not just your kids, but your grandkids. Are they safe? Will I be called upon to take care of them? Should I call child services if I'm concerned about my child's use? And then there's the situation when grandparents become the de facto parents. There's a real sense of split loyalty. Grandparents want to facilitate visits because their kids want to see their grandkids. They worry about the effects of addiction on kids. They find it hard to focus on one generation because they love 2 generations. Siblings feel betrayed and disappointed, robbed of what they worry about might have been a lifelong intimate relationship, guilty that they may have escaped the disease because somebody with an active substance use disorder will never be a peer. They will always be somebody who somebody else is worrying about. So, and then we get into, when does our worry, our concern, our overfunctioning, our protecting of behavior, when does that become something we need to treat? We need to treat that when our lives are becoming diminished in the way that we can't even see our own needs at all. If you're grocery shopping and you walk out with a cart full of food and you didn't even put in it anything you like, you should look at that. If you believe that it is your job to control somebody else's mood, particularly their mood, their happiness, their behavior, or their life, examine that. Because not only is it not true we can't control somebody else's mood, life, or behavior, but ours will become diminished along the way. So we also have the potential to become addicted to control and rescuing behavior to manage our own fear and pain. And I like this image because that's what we do. We hover. Don't kid yourself. If you are a hover, as described as strong, and so gentle. You never have used the word no in your life. Excuse me. If you never use that word, then you need to evaluate whether you aren't harming somebody else and certainly harming yourself. In the 80s, I had a boyfriend who used to sing this to me. I'm not going to sing it to you now because I don't want to scare everybody off. But if anybody remembers the song Up on Cripple Creek, this was sung to me. This song was sung to me, and I thought it was a compliment. So let's talk about enabling for just a minute. This is the industry's word for behavior which seeks to alleviate consequences, or it's the behavior we do to try and make somebody else happy when it's not really ours to do. Every time we make dysfunction comfortable, it has a better chance of continuing. And every time we alleviate those consequences of natural order, we are making it comfortable. So I don't use the word enabling. I use the word protecting. We are seeking to protect something which has the byproduct of protecting the disorder from treatment. We may be trying to protect our relationships with people. We may be trying to protect their future. We may be trying to protect an illusion of them. We may be trying to protect our own substance use disorders or our own image of ourselves. But every time we protect something, instead of telling the truth, instead of reckoning with the disorder, instead of allowing them to experience the consequences of their behavior, we may be protecting the status quo, and the status quo may not be what we wish to protect. Because what we may be teaching is that the person with the substance use disorder is not responsible for his or her own well-being. We may be teaching that there are no consequences for choices. If we clean up every mess, there is no consequence for that person. There's only consequence for us. We may be teaching that happiness is in and of itself a viable goal. And I'm here to tell you guys, happiness is not a permanent state. It is not something that we can promote for our kids. When we say, all I want is for you to be happy, we are saying basically anything less than happy is going to be disappointing, number one. Number two, there are people who are not born on this planet who can be happy. Happy just escapes them based on their neurochemistry. And for them, purpose and meaning might be better goals. And the other thing is, when happy is the goal, what's the easiest way to get there? And that is substances. My friend Christopher told me that people with substance use disorders confuse happiness with euphoria. They don't know that simple contentment and joy may well be happiness. For them, unless it's an off the charts rocket experience, may not even be considered happy. So what we also teach is that family can and will handle all issues as they arise, that will keep filling the gaps of functioning even as those gaps grow wider. So how do we stop teaching this? We start using healthy boundaries. And we start using boundaries that aren't cutoffs, that aren't cruel, that aren't mean, that aren't careless. We use boundaries that protect the love we feel for them and keep their chaos out. So everybody has the right to have an area that is their business, that is their feelings, their choices, their tastes, their responsibilities, their privacy, their money. And that area is the area we protect with boundaries. And we protect that area with boundaries by sometimes having to walk away, by hanging up the phone, by going for a drive. Sometimes we protect boundaries by biting our tongue, by not giving unsolicited advice. But there are times when we definitely have to firm up boundaries, and that's when there's violence in our home. when the undue stress of loving somebody with a substance use disorder is making you sick, when there's destruction of property, theft, bad influence upon vulnerable kids, the lying is making you crazy, you're treated with disrespect, and you're facing financial ruin. And the reason I say firm up boundaries when you're treated with disrespect, because if you do not insist upon respect, nothing else you say will be heard. Ultimately, nothing else. And you're teaching a lesson. You're teaching them that they don't have to treat you with respect. So the questions I use when a loved one calls up and says, I'm stuck at a bar and I don't have a ride home. Question to ask is, whose problem is it? Well, it isn't the person on the other end of the receiver, it's the caller. So whose problem is it? It's the caller's. Who grows if mom, sister, husband, child run in the car and says, I'll come get you, I'll come get you? What will they be deprived of if the receiver of the call solves the problem? They may be deprived of a lesson. Walking those miles, it might be not that long. It might be an important consequence. It might be that the law catches up with them and they may need to be arrested. And what do they gain if I stay out of it? They may gain a lesson. I prefer this one when, this can be used in all kinds of settings, not just with substance use disorders. My son would call up or walk into my office. He's 19 now. He might walk in, look at me with what I call moo eyes and say, I'm hungry. And I think to myself, whose problem is it? It's his. Who grows if I leap out of my office chair and say, oh, let me make you lunch? What would he be deprived of if I solved the problem? The sense of self-efficacy of preparing his own meal. And what do I gain? What does he gain if I stay out of it? Confidence. Those are things. The more we stay out of things and let our children or our loved one do things for themselves, they gain confidence. So a note about anger. Anger and resentment, our anger and resentment are signs that we need to evaluate our boundaries. If we are walking around resentful all the time, we need to start evaluating what rules, guidelines, structure do I need in my home so I am not burning up. If we have trouble with this concept, we may want to do a boundary ledger. Take a piece of paper, draw a fat line down the middle of the page, put under one column our responsibility, on the other column their responsibility. Let's say what treatment we will provide is on ours. What behavior we can support, what behavior we can house, what behavior we can say, wow, that's great. All of those things, our recovery, with whom we speak to about our recovery, our support team, that's on our end of the recovery, our responsibility, our side of the ledger. Theirs is their recovery program, how to resolve their problems, their therapy, their growing up, because it needs to be them. So when setting boundaries, make them specific, make them reasonable, make them enforceable, make them logically related to the goal. If you talk to me with disrespect, I will hang up the phone. It's specific, it's reasonable, it's enforceable because you can hang up that phone, and it's logically related to the goal of not being talked to disrespectfully. Where we tend to get in trouble is where we say, if you talk to me with disrespect, I'm not cooking dinner tomorrow. It's specific, it's reasonable, it's enforceable because you don't have to cook dinner, but it's not logically related to the disrespect unless the disrespect is related to your cooking. So try and make the consequences relatable to the offense. So, and you can stop here, guys. You can stop. If you know about denial, if you know about boundary setting, if you know about quote unquote protecting and codependence, you can stop. But I worry if you do on your journey of recovery, if you stop, you are left with a false sense of responsibility for somebody else's decisions. You will continue waiting for the other shoe to drop, and you'll continue to get sick even if they get healthier. We want all of you, the 4 family members and the person who needs the help, to remain healthy together. That's a healthy hand. Because if this person goes to treatment or gets healthy or gets healthy, and we, the supporting team, do not get healthy as well, the odds of relapse and regression with us are higher. So what are we talking about when I talk about this? I'm talking about acceptance. And I'm talking about that terrible, gut-wrenching acceptance that my loved one has a disorder that I can't fix. That my loved one has a disorder that has potentially lethal consequences. That my loved one's life needs to be turned over to them so that I can begin my recovery. Because if the weight of your recovery was on their shoulders, they couldn't handle it. Don't put it there. So do your own, take care of yours. Acceptance is really no more or less than recognizing an existing reality that we do not and cannot control another's recovery or ultimately their life. So here's the letter of resignation. Dear Odysseus, I now realize that my behavior and attitude towards you and your struggles have not always been helpful. Therefore, I resign from the following: being preoccupied with your problems, trying to control you, caretaking you, worrying constantly about you, protecting you from the consequences of your actions, snooping in your life, shaming or blaming you, walking on eggshells around you and your disease, assuming responsibility for your recovery, protecting you, or being a martyr. I give this letter to you as a gift for both you and me so that you can manage your recovery and I can manage mine. My wish is that we both have a full life. Now, I don't advocate people actually, copy this letter and send it to their loved one. The exercise of writing it, owning what you have done, what you're willing to resign from, is the value. Putting it on the refrigerator, it's your to-do list, not theirs. So the process of change, it takes time and effort to clear old neural structures of worry. We are like Velcro for the negative. It was important evolutionarily for us to remember a bad thing, what was dangerous, what was lethal. It was not particularly evolutionarily required for us to remember a good moment. So we remember the negative. We remember the dangerous. We remember the threatening, and we slough off, the positive. It's our job to embed the positive. Embed it right in that journal that you have that you do not use. Open it up. Positives, great gratitude lists, either one. Acknowledge good things. If your loved one who struggles with an addictive disorder is sober and they ask, how are you doing? I want you to write that down. That's something to be grateful for. That's a loved one who is not just looking at themselves, looking at you. As my friend Paul used to say to me, the thing you don't get about us is when we're active in addiction, we may not be much, but we're all we think about. So when they're asking you about you, it's a good sign. And we think it takes about 5 positive actions to equal 1 negative. And so we've got to embed them though. Take the time, bring them to a meeting, talk about the good moments, embed the good. Thought, focus, create a neural network of gratitude, create a neural network of positivity. It will calm all the rest of your brain down. So, and remember, progress is messy. We like to think it looks like the image of success, straight line, but it really looks like the other one. It is crazy of ups and backs and sideways and plateaus and dips and up and depths and plateaus and roundabouts. So don't become discouraged. What might look like a plateau or a relapse might actually be the next step right before growth. Thank you. That's the end.
Wow. That
Too
is
fast?
such an amazing presentation. I got so much out of that for so many different reasons, and I think everybody could relate to this in so many different scenarios in life, not even just with substance use, you know, just in general, life in general. So I've been taking notes all along, just listening to you, and I love what you just said about, you know, when they ask about you, like to write that down, because that, yeah,
Yeah.
that is important. So wow, thank you so much. So you're okay with taking some questions?
Sure. I've got, as long as my voice holds out, it's getting a little scratchy. So.
We have about